Our first question today is from Gregor, who asks, with the release of the manifestos this week, how many of the 2019 manifesto commitments have been met?
Well, I think the answer is not many, because we are in a very different world to 2019. You've had numerous prime ministers. But the one big thing I suppose you can say is that they did get Brexit done. The UK has left the single market and the customs union as promised, but it hasn't helped them politically. Obviously, levelling up was a big feature of the Conservative manifesto. That's really been almost entirely dropped, and that really died a death with Boris Johnson's premiership. Neither Liz Truss nor Rishi Sunak were very interested in that. And obviously, the 2019 manifesto promised lower taxes, and the tax take is now at a near record high. So no, in terms of their 2019 manifesto, the Conservatives don't score well at all.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that as well as the headline ones, get Brexit done, tick, levelling up, not tick, there were quite a lot of specific promises on health and social care in the 2019 manifesto. And it's a bit of a mix on some of the specifics where they've been met and not met. 50,000 more nurses recruited, yes. 6,000 more GPs working, no. And in terms of funding as well, the funding to the NHS has gone up in cash terms, but not in real terms because of inflation. And also, obviously, much of that healthcare provision went towards COVID and dealing with the pandemic. So in terms of whether you can count it or not, there's some creative arguments to be made on both sides. But some of the headline ones that I think people might remember from 2019, those 14 new hospitals, which haven't been built or finished, and many of them were not new hospitals anyway. They were hospital refurbishments and extensions. So a cross against that one, making Britain the best place in the world to give birth in terms of maternal healthcare. I remember that one quite strikingly. And obviously, a number of things have happened since then, but we have had reports into the very poor state of maternal healthcare in this country, with half of hospitals deemed inadequate, essentially. And then the really big one, comprehensive cross-party plan for funding of social care, which kind of got parked in its entirety. So I think if you were looking at some of those specific healthcare promises, and I think health was a big factor in 2019, other than Brexit and levelling up, you would probably be quite disappointed.
Okay, and the next is from Simon. Who will be the biggest name to lose their seat? Worth saying we've had several questions along these lines. It seems listeners are very keen for a bit of Schadenfreude.
Yes, which would not helped by the fact that a number of Conservative MPs whose seats might have been at risk have chosen to stand down. Obviously, Dominic Raab not standing, Michael Gove not standing, Theresa May is standing down, although that one sort of makes a bit more sense. I don't know, George, who's top of your list?
It's got to be Jeremy Hunt, hasn't it?
Jeremy Hunt in the new seat of Godalming Ash in Surrey.
Yes, and who is running very much as a local candidate, mainly by going on about how hard people who earn over six figures have it, which is very much a message targeted at Surrey rather than the average voter who earns a salary of about 33,000. He's been saying he'd be interested in looking at the 62% marginal rate that kicks in on earnings over 100,000. Obviously, the Conservatives are raising the threshold for the child benefit charge to around 120,000. So this is him love bombing affluent voters in Surrey as he bids to keep his seats from the Lib Dems' clutches.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Hunt is probably the most likely for a Portillo moment, as it's called. I found out actually that Michael Portillo, the seat that he lost is Enfield Southgate, which is mine. Other names to mention.
Yeah. Rees-Mogg in Somerset, I was going to say, is another obvious,
Yeah,
less marginal,
because
but
the boundaries.
yeah.
The boundaries are being redrawn in Somerset, and so Jacob Rees-Mogg could have a much harder time. Boundaries also being redrawn in Suella Braverman's seat, which is Farnham and Waterlooville, I think the new seat is called, which could give her a slightly tougher time. Penny Mordaunt, worth mentioning, particularly after the D-Day debacle in Portsmouth, and Ian Duncan Smith in Chingford and Woodford Green, which we've talked about on this podcast before, with Labour deciding to deselect Faiza Shaheen in that seat, who came very close to beating him in 2019. But the big ones that I think are unlikely but wildcard ones to watch out for: Liz Truss in the safe seat of South West Norfolk. I've written that she's facing a challenge from an independent candidate, former Conservative, called James Bagg, who's hoping to pick up disaffected Tory voters over there. So not predicted to lose her seat, but watch out for that one. And of course, there's the Prime Minister as well, isn't there?
Yes, there was at least one MRP poll which put him within, I think, about 4 points of losing. It's funny, elections, you always have discussion over whether the Prime Minister could lose their seat. I remember it happening in 2005 with Tony Blair in the wake of Iraq. People were talking about it last time round with Boris Johnson in Uxbridge, which was fairly marginal, about a 7,000 majority. And it normally proves to be a wasted, pointless discussion, because the Prime Minister will often outperform their party, because constituents actually quite like having the Prime Minister as their local MP. This time round, given how badly the Tories are polling, it doesn't feel so remote. It comes to that, how badly Rishi Sunak is polling. I still think it's unlikely, given the scale of his majority, but certainly possible.
Yeah, I think unlikely, but for those who are keen for a bit of Schadenfreude, that would be the one to watch. Our next question comes from Jack, who says, last Parliament, we saw Tory MPs lose the whip but continue to sit on the government benches, like Matt Hancock. If Jeremy Corbyn wins as an independent, assuming he'd like to sit with old allies, could he sit on the government benches? Could Labour stop him? The optics could be significant. What do you reckon, George?
That's a good question. Now, I'm not aware of any hard rules on this. I think, as with so much of Parliament, it operates according to convention and informality. My guess is if Jeremy Corbyn wins and Labour also get a big majority, i.e. you have a lot of Labour MPs crowding the government benches, I think Labour might be happy to overlook it, in the sense that they will be keen to move on, I think, from the feuding with Corbyn. They'll have bigger things to worry about as the government of the day, and it might look a little petty to single him out. But it probably depends in part on how Corbyn behaves in terms of whether he chooses to aim his fire at the new Labour government early on. You can certainly see circumstances in which it would become a standoff.
See, my first thought on this was, is there going to be enough space? Because if Labour win the kind of majority that the polls are predicting, they could have 100 more MPs than there is space for them on the benches. Now, obviously, you don't get all MPs turning up every day for every debate in the House of Commons, but for something like PMQs, where they do tend to fill the benches, would there be space for him on the Labour benches? I would imagine not. I think it's going to be standing room only. But I agree with you that if he did win as an independent, Labour would probably prefer to just let him sit where he likes and not have an argument over it, rather than make it a big issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, there's very rarely space, which is why you get everyone sitting on the steps. But if Labour do get the supermajority, I mean, it will make the point that the Commons isn't necessarily the most rational design. We may get a chance to try a different chamber with room for everyone when the renovations finally take full effect.
Oh yeah, if the ceiling falls down and they move the MPs out, maybe they'll move somewhere that actually has enough seats for all the MPs. Who knows?
Right. The next question is from Lizzie. Did the media apply the level of scrutiny to the Tories in 2019? Is there a reason why D-Day is a bigger deal than, for instance, Boris Johnson stealing a journalist's phone and hiding in a fridge?
This is an interesting question. 2019 feels like a very long time ago. Maybe it's because I got so little sleep during that campaign. I remember the media trying to draw attention to various antics of Boris Johnson, in particular the hiding in a fridge where he was trying to avoid a journalist, and so he sort of opened a door and ran into it, and it turned out to be an industrial fridge. And nothing stuck. Nothing seemed to grab public imagination. There was just such a pro-Boris wave, and so many Conservatives who were happy to go out in interviews and dismiss or write off or laugh at any of the criticism of him. It just seemed to bounce off him. So I don't necessarily think it's that journalists were ignoring it or giving him a free pass. I think it was that they were trying to highlight things and it just wasn't sticking. One of the things that's been really clear in this campaign is that every minor hiccup or blunder that Rishi Sunak or any of the Conservatives make is really seized on as evidence of the terminal decline, of the fact that it's all going wrong. I don't think leaving D-Day early is a trivial thing like that. I think it is probably more significant than hiding from a journalist in a fridge, just because of how much of an embarrassment it was, embarrassing Britain on the world stage, and also handing Keir Starmer the opportunity to look statesman-like and prime ministerial with world leaders when Rishi Sunak wasn't there. So I think that one probably is a bigger misstep than some of the smaller campaign gaffes that get seized on. I think if Boris Johnson had messed up like that during the campaign, it probably would have got more attention. But Boris Johnson, for all of his many faults, really did have a sense of what would play well and what would present him in the best light. And he was quite good at those world stage sort of events.
Yes, I completely agree that the D-Day debacle is distinct from a standard campaign gaffe. I always think so much of the treatments of these moments is affected by the overall narrative and direction of the campaign. So when you're a leader, who looks like they're going to win, then you can glide through these gaffes more easily because the media treat you with a greater degree of respect, if you like, because you're on course to win and be re-elected. And even when the Tories were having bad moments in 2019, no one ever expected really Labour to get a majority. It was hung parliament at best. This time round, the Conservatives have had a torrid campaign from the very start of the rain-soaked Rishi Sunak. And once you get caught in that downward spiral, suddenly everything looks awful. Gaffes which actually are reasonably fine. I mean, Rishi Sunak at the start was chatting about the Euros to some voters in Wales and was saying, how will you get on? Looking forward to them, forgetting that Wales weren't playing in the Euros, didn't qualify. I don't think that was too bad, but it was blown up into a terrible moment because the narrative had been set that everything's going wrong for Rishi Sunak. I mean, a good example of where people overestimate gas. I remember 2015, David Cameron forgetting which football team he supported. He said, I'd rather you supported West Ham. Someone corrected himself and said Aston Villa being his actual team. At the time, people said it's just indicative of a pretty poor Tory campaign, David Cameron not really connecting well with voters, they go on to increase their seats and win a majority. So sometimes campaigns are overestimated, but this time round, the numbers are really clear. The Tories are having a terrible time, and that's why everything Rishi Sunak does wrong gets more attention and discussion than all the things Boris Johnson did wrong in 2019.
Our final question, I love this question, it comes from Julius, who asks, what is the best response when a candidate that you do not want to win knocks on your door? Do you challenge their policies, or do you promise them your vote to make them try less hard at the neighbours? I love that idea. A bit of sabotage. George, has this ever happened to you? What do you do?
I don't think it has, actually. I slightly wish it had, because this is democracy at its finest, real engagement. Well, I think promising them your vote would certainly be the most Machiavellian option. So I think if you're strategically minded, that's exactly what you'd do. But no, I wouldn't slam the door in their face unless you've got a particularly good reason to do that, because quite often voters do complain, I'll never hear from, they never hear from their MP, or they haven't heard from the candidate. So if they've made the time, then you can combine the two, can't you? You can promise them your vote, and then you can try and do some digging. You can quiz them how the campaign's really going. Quiz them on if it's let's say it's a Conservative candidate. Lure them into a false sense of security. Find out what they really think about Rishi Sunak, for instance. I mean, this is me encouraging voters to find some stories out. Essentially, that's how I'd do it. Try and find out something interesting from them,
and then send it in to the New Statesman, and we'll talk about it on this podcast. I was canvassing with a Labour candidate earlier this week, and the level of data, and I think the other parties are doing it too, the level of data that they try and collect on potential voters, are you going to vote for us? On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you? Do you need a postal vote? Do you need some more encouragement? Should we come back and talk to you later with the candidate? Would you like the candidate to phone you? On polling day itself, they go out, and if somebody has said, yeah, I'm definitely voting for this party, they'll knock on the door and say, you said you were going to vote for us, just checking, have you voted? So a lot of effort does go into it. I would say that a lot of the volunteers, because it's quite likely you'll be canvassed by a volunteer, not by the candidate themselves, like they're giving up their time, they're engaged in politics. It's not their fault if you really don't like the party that they represent. And so, civility and robust discussion in politics, I think is always a good thing. But then maybe I would say that because I have never been canvassed. I very rarely even get leaflets. And I actually think I'm probably a canvasser's worst nightmare from any party, because if they knock on the door and say, who are you voting for? What are your political priorities? They won't get away for the next kind of hour and a half. I'll be like, come in, let me tell you everything that I think is wrong with British politics at the moment.
You do an hour on house building.
Yeah, an hour on house building, an hour on drug regulation, childcare. They probably want to avoid my house. But I think if a candidate comes to your door, whether you want to vote for them or not, it is an opportunity to be heard and have a discussion. And all MPs talk constantly about, these are the issues that matter in my constituency. I've been speaking to people and they're really upset or they're really engaged about this. And if you want your issues to resonate, talk to them.
Absolutely. And especially because you might not vote for them, but they could well be your MP. And always healthy to have a dialogue with a future MP, and you can set them a challenge. You can say, I'm not going to vote for you this time round, but if you deliver this, then I'll reconsider. And then you can hold them to account down the line.
Democracy in action. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to submit a question about the election for us to discuss on a future podcast, you can do so at newstatesman.com/you ask us. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a question in the comments.